Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. As we move on to the next session, I have with me Ray Powell, a very experienced former U.S. Air Force officer. He has had an illustrious career in the military, and now he's the executive director of a non-profit maritime transparency called SEALIGHT, and we are very eager to hear from Ray what he has to show us. I think that there's going to be some a presentation. Maybe if you can talk a bit about SEALIGHT during your presentation and also explain what are the technical or technological background to that. But before I hand over to Ray, I would just like to make two quick points. The first is regarding what the CNS Bangladesh Navy mentioned yesterday, Admiral Hassan, when he said that MDA is not something what our senses feel, but what our analysts tell us. And that's such a loaded statement and such a deep statement, because there's one thing to see something on a screen, and it's quite another that when someone else analyzes and interprets that picture to actually identify threats or point out the irregularities in that picture. And that is what analysts do. We heard this morning Skylight, and of course on the online panelists were also speaking about the use of AI, and now we have Ray here. The second issue is what is MDA and what do we understand by MDA? So if we look at, we all have our own definitions in our doctrines. Some are even not defined but only understood. I will just go by the IMO's definition, which essentially breaks down MDA into three parts. First being the maritime situational awareness is what we see, how the situation is there. And the second part is the maritime threat awareness. And the third will be maritime response awareness. So I think Ray is going to talk about all three constituents, or maybe not the response, but at least the situational awareness and the threat awareness. And without much ado, I think I will hand over to Ray. Over to you.
All right. So on a shoestring, actually, Simon, when you were talking about buying a little extra time. I thought maybe you were buying a little extra time for me, since I'm giving this in 30 minutes, so I'm on a shoestring. SEALIGHT has raised over its entire history less than $10,000. And somehow we have managed to make a name for ourselves in the maritime domain awareness space. But it's going to be up to you to decide whether that's a blessing or a curse, or whether it's just inevitable. And I think it's probably just inevitable. So first I want to tell you, is that really how much time I have? 14 minutes and 20 seconds? Before I get started, I want to let you know what I've been doing. When you've seen me over here at my table, sort of tapping away on my computer, actually over the last 24 hours, oh good, now I've got, oh, look at the time, it's just climbing. I'm really excited. So I was actually tracking a ship-to-ship transfer and then a ship going back to a particular Southeast Asian country, which I won't mention right now because it's an active investigation, communicating that information to the authorities in that country, as well as the country where the ship was registered. That ship is now under the observation of that country, and they are planning to board it probably within the next 36 hours or so. Now, who the hell am I? Why should they listen to me? I'm just this guy with no money. But I think what we've managed to do is bring into the public realm this entire MDA discussion, because part of the reason they listen to me is because I don't work for any government, but I do have kind of a megaphone. So if we were over in Southeast Asia, you might, and you were involved in the NDA space, you probably would have been familiar with our work with SEALIGHT, because we are actually quite well known. And that's why I want to bring this to your attention, is that there are going to be more Ray Powells. It's not just going to be SEALIGHT. It's going to be other people like me sitting in our pajamas in our house tracking ships and saying, wow, look what's happening. What do? So we exploit not just open source data, but commercial data. Oftentimes we get it donated to us. We have, we sweet talk certain organizations into giving us free access to their data because they know that through us they can get their name into the public sphere. And we use it to expose dark vessels, gray zone actors, others who are doing illicit things. We are very aggressive in engaging, not just with government officials, but with the public, with the media. So we are kind of aggressively in the public space. And by doing all that, we bypass the gatekeepers. Now, most people in here are very familiar with government work. I myself worked for the United States government for 35 years. And I will tell you this, governments are terrible about putting out information. Just terrible. And I include my own government in that. It is not what we do in government naturally. We protect information, we hold information, we do use information, but it is not, we don't put it into the public space. Even when we want to, we find it very hard to do. Which is why we at SEALIGHT decided to develop the information commercially and in the open source. I'll give you a couple examples of things that we've done. You see up on the screen in that first block, there's a tweet from this guy named Ray Powell. This is from about 2 years ago. This was a Chinese survey ship operating off the Vietnamese coast, surrounded by China Coast Guard and maritime militia ships. And it was doing what we at first called a survey in force. In other words, it was basically daring Vietnam to do something about it. But the more we looked at it, it didn't look anything like a survey. Those of you who know surveys know that this is not really a survey. At least not any pattern you would recognize. What if you knew Mandarin, and I don't, but I have been so informed, this is actually very close to the Chinese character meaning China. China basically spent a month with a dozen ships driving around in circles saying China off of the Vietnamese coast. So that's Trung, which is part of Trung Quốc, which if it's going to sound more Vietnamese to you because I speak Vietnamese, not Chinese, but that is the character. And I didn't actually know it until the Mandarin-speaking New York Times reporter that reported on this told me about it. The second sort of panel there is what we did in terms of trying to find out what China was doing in the Yellow Sea in building this big rig in the middle of the Yellow Sea and basically having an aquaculture program there. Now, there's nothing wrong with China having an aquaculture program. They're basically deep sea salmon harvesting. But they built it in the middle of a provisional measures zone, which is a place where they agreed with Korea that they would consult each other before they did such a thing. Well, in this case, they decided not to, and so South Korea became very interested in this, and so they began to send ships out, and the ships were confronted by Chinese ships. Nobody knew what these things were until finally at SEALIGHT we were able to do the research on the vessel tracks back in February of 2020, February of this year, and figure out, and then we went to a satellite imagery organization called Skyfi, and we said, if you will give us the imagery for this, basically, go find this for us, we will get you into the news. And so, thus, they managed to find the imagery. They managed to find, using our ship tracking, managed to find this thing and finally identify what these rigs were that were being put out in the Yellow Sea. And then, of course, we're probably best known for our work in the Philippines. And what the situation was, for those who might remember, was up through about early 2023, the Philippines, especially under Rodrigo Duterte, was very much interested in not reporting on the things happening in the West Philippine Sea. Very limited transparency. We began public reporting of ship movements in the South China Sea in January 2023. In February 2023, and I have it on very good authority from multiple sources in the Philippine government, in direct response to what we were doing, the Philippines elected to begin publicly publicizing the abuses that were happening in the West Philippine Sea, the things that you've seen since, the ramming, the water cannoning, all of those kinds of things. We have termed this an assertive transparency campaign, and it was one of those things that was sort of driven by SEALIGHT'S work. This work, because so much of it involves the People's Republic of China, has not made me popular with certain Chinese state media. So your mileage may vary, but you can decide whether I'm a warmonger or a maritime expert. I actually claim to be neither. I think that there are many people in this room who are far more of a maritime expert than this 35-year Air Force veteran. But you can see that one in the middle sort of makes it look like I'm sitting on this pile of money. I like money, but I don't get money. So as I say, I do this on a shoestring. It is interesting, though, the amount of energy that Chinese state media has directed at me and Sea Light for simply turning on the lights in the gray zone. So I like this picture better. I think this is probably more like what I do. This is actually almost lifelike. Yeah, when I do put on my superhero costume, that's pretty much what I look like. If you're interested in what we do, you can find us at SEALIGHT.live. That is my email address. Please feel free to email me. A lot of people who follow me on X, which used to be called Twitter, so that is my Twitter handle. And if you're interested in Indo-Pacific affairs, there is a podcast. And so that is the name of the podcast that I do with my former diplomat friend, Jim Caruso. So I'm going to go ahead and stop there since I see that clock continues to tick down, and I want to give time for questions.
So I think that was quite a breathtaking presentation. So while the audience is making up their mind or framing their questions, please allow me the privilege of the moderator, and let me begin. You spoke about Sea Light. How much of AI goes into this, or is it all your analysis?
So I use a tool for my ship tracking in particular. I use a tool called Starboard, which uses a certain amount of AI. It's a New Zealand company. I also will often take ship tracks and dump them into an AI program like ChatGPT. I often will take different ones. Now, I will say that AI, this kind of AI is far from perfect. So you can't just dump it in there and get a response, and that's the answer. I have argued with AI, I bet you a lot of you have too, where I see it gives me a response back that I think is ridiculous. But what I will say about all of this, including the imagery, including the ship tracking ability, including AI, we are just at the start of where this is all going. And I think this is one of the things, one of the big takeaways, is if you are thinking about MDA strictly from a government perspective, you may find that the open source and the commercial world race past you while you're still trying to figure out how to control the information. You're going to have people with the rapidly, getting more and more affordable ship tracking, imagery, AI, dark vessel detection. All of that is going to become more and more accessible and allow 100 flowers to bloom. So one of my messages here is that get ready, because if you don't like what I'm doing, it's inevitable. It's coming your way whether you like it or not. So I mentioned at the beginning that I was feeding information to a particular Southeast Asian government. That government made a decision early on that it would rather work with me than try to fight me, because you can't really stop independent actors. There was actually people who went to the U.S. Embassy in that country and said, "Can you shut him up?" And they said, "No, he's a private citizen. I can't shut him up." And so eventually I got called and actually went to visit some senior government officials, and I said, "Look, I'm on your side. I want you to win. Just give me some people I can tip off as I'm putting this stuff out here." And so in some cases, I actually don't publicize if I think that there are, for example, law enforcement actions that could happen, and I don't want to actually trample on the crime scene before they're able to do their thing.
Ray, let's say that you're the king of a developing country in the Indian Ocean region, and you wanted to enhance your country's MDA, and you didn't have really much money to do it. What would be your key tips in setting up an MDA centre, a fusion centre, without a lot of money behind it?
Yeah. Honestly, my first impulse might be just to contract it. I mean, there are very good private OSINT contract companies, many of them startups, who do exquisite work. I've worked with several of them. And you might just contact one of those. They have multi-intelligence capability, multi-int. They have a tremendous amount of experience, and they are scalable, and they are looking to make a buck. And honestly, they can often do it much cheaper than can a government.
This is again a tactical level question. Lieutenant Commander Rohit, Ops Officer, IFC Iowa. We have monitored incidents related to fuel smuggling, especially in the Southeast Asia, wherein we have seen small vessels and fishing vessels coming alongside big merchant vessels and transferring fuel. So my question is, have you recently monitored any such incident? And if yes, then how your analysis got fruitful, and how was the entire action coordinated? If you may elaborate on that. Thank you.
So we have pretty limited ability to monitor small vessels, simply because they don't tend to broadcast AIS that can be seen from space, and even if they aren't dark. So the small vessels are a harder problem for us, at least with our level of technology. Now, I think that there are others that have, again, commercial companies, those kinds, who have better technology than we do. I would just point back to my initial example. The ships that I was tracking that were doing the large ship to large ship transfers are frankly in the area around the East and South China Seas. A lot of these are becoming increasingly well understood by those of us who follow it. There are a tremendous number who operate right off of Taiwan and sort of use that as a base of operations, which is sort of astonishing if you think about it. But I think most of it is just a very central location. Of course, you can also think of the stuff that goes east of Singapore, just kind of in those waters up there. But so I think the large vessel stuff is a lot easier. The large vessel to small vessel, you really have to be good. I mean, as everybody here knows very well, catching a snapshot of a ship moving at sea is impossible, unless you really get lucky.
Ray, I'm just still getting over the vision of you sitting there in your pajamas. When you talk about the fact that you use starboard, so obviously starboard brings satellite imagery with it and a degree of AI analytic stuff as well. Do you use other satellite imagery? So you pull it all together. You just don't rely on starboard. Is that correct?
I have, for example, I have access to some planet data through Stanford University, with which I'm associated. I have access, so Sky-Fi, I have kind of, again, a drug deal with, like, if I have a good opportunity for them to get in the news or to develop something that might get them some attention, I can ask them to get a picture for me. So again, talking about doing it on a shoestring, and I think it's the fact that we're small, nonprofit, we don't have a boss, that makes us so flexible and able to sort of make these sort of these deals with these companies. And what it's done, I think, is really bring to our attention how much new technology is coming into the space all the time. And by the way, I should mention, because you've given me the opportunity, when we talk about AI, there are companies now, Silicon Valley companies, others, who are now even developing something called predictive AI, where they can look out 4 to 6 months in the future and predict future events with pretty good accuracy based on just pulling in a lot of the right kinds of data. So one which my daughter actually works for, called Rhombus Power, which is, actually works in Stanford Research Park near my house, predicted the unrest here in Bangladesh in summer of 2024. Basically predict that period of instability about 5 months in advance, and actually put out reports saying there's going to be a period of maximum instability in Bangladesh in the summer of 2024. And they do it by pulling in everything from employment data to climate data to public opinion data, and then they let the AI do its thing and came up with that very accurate prediction, which obviously turned out to be true.
I hope the organisers will forgive me, because my question, strictly speaking, is not on maritime domain awareness, but because Ray has become very well known and his company in shedding light on what's been happening in grey zone operations, particularly focusing around the Philippine Coast Guard. Given there's a lot of people in this audience that are Naval and Coast Guard people, do you have any insights from this study that you've been working on for what these grey zone operations will mean for Coast Guards and naval operations? Because you're often quoted in the press about how, for example, the Philippines Coast Guard has performed, and I fully commend your praise for the Filipinos. But so it's a more general question, and apologies to the organisers, not strictly speaking MDA, it's more on maritime enforcement agency implications for grey zones.
Well, so I think one of the interesting things about the Philippine Coast Guard is it is overwhelmed at this point, dealing with an extremely large and aggressive neighbor that is sort of eating away at its maritime rights. And they've had to sort of go and think about, how do we solve this problem over the long term? And by going public and using this assertive transparency campaign, they have not succeeded in deterring the People's Republic of China. What they have succeeded in doing is gaining a lot of national and international support for capacity building for the Philippine Coast Guard. And in the end, that's probably the most important thing. So a lot of people will say correctly that assertive transparency has not been successful in deterring Chinese aggression. But it has been successful in doing something, and my time is up because there's this big red sign behind you that said that my time is up. So. Please go on. I don't know, it's very imposing. But I mean, and I have said actually in some public statements, as you mentioned recently, that the Philippine Coast Guard, I think demonstrably, and this is not to say anything about any other Coast Guard, I have full respect to the United States Coast Guard, but has demonstrably proven itself to be the world's bravest Coast Guard. Now again, it doesn't mean that somebody else couldn't be brave, but what they face on a routine basis, rammings, water cannonings, essentially, I mean, there was a 350-ton Philippine Coast Guard ship that was recently almost rammed by a 7,500-ton guided missile destroyer near Scarborough Shoal. And they did it professionally, with great resilience, with great dedication to duty, with great restraint. And they've been facing this situation for 2.5 years. And so the reason that I came out with that public statement was there has been some domestic turmoil in the Philippines recently where some of their congressmen have been attacking the Philippine Coast Guard. And I was frankly offended for them. And so that was why I went public like that.
So allow me to just take on from where, the question that Dr. Bergen asked. This is again got nothing to do with MDA, but about grey zone and our understanding of what grey zone means. Interestingly, I heard one of the Filipino professor from the Philippines speak about how ramming was actually at one point of time a form of warfare. Ships used to ram each other before the advent of artillery. And so if in modern context, if one ship or a state-owned ship rams another state-owned ship, so is it a form of warfare? Is it a form of actual, can this be called a conflict? Instead of going back, taking a step back and say, no, it's grey zone. That means in our minds, we don't know whether yet we are in a conflict or how should we respond. Is this an act of war or is it not?
I think this is a really, really good question because it brings to light the fact that when most of us here think of the words war or peace, legal or illegal, civil or military, we think in very distinct categories. China does not think that way. And I am a person who very firmly believes, for example, that China will not go to what we think of as to war over Taiwan, or at least it doesn't plan to, it doesn't want to, because it thinks that it can get all of what it wants through gray zone activities. And really the way to think about the gray zone, and this is, I had a testimony before the US Senate a month ago where I talked about the fact that nations really need to be developing a gray zone counter strategy, one that is interagency, cross-governmental, because China is exploiting all of the gaps in all of the bureaucracies that we set up to organize our thinking, right? And so, just like you said, ramming, you might have thought ramming was a wartime activity, but it's become a gray zone activity. A fishing ship that doesn't fish, but instead asserts sovereignty. A 12,000-ton Coast Guard ship that's basically a giant billboard for this is our country, right? Building an artificial island on a coral reef. All of these things are things that are outside of our thinking, our experience, and we still, decades into it, have not come up with effective counter strategies because we're still stuck in our bureaucracies, and also, frankly, we like law, right? We like to have clear, we don't want to have fishing ships that act as militias, because what do you do with targeting for that? Is that a legitimate legal target? We're still thinking that way, and China knows that we're thinking that way. Therefore, they do it, and they realize that they're winning because we simply don't have counter strategies. So, in some ways, because we're talking about the Indian Ocean here, we're very fortunate to be sort of far away from where the hot spot is, but it is moving in this direction, and at some point it will get here. I think some of the edges are, I was just tracking some research vessels in the Bay of Bengal just this morning. It is reaching into this area. Let me just say that.
It'll be a nice, interesting research for that software which you said, predictive AI, to predict when this thing will reach the Indian Ocean. I think that will be something which it'll be useful for us. But DG BIMRAD wants to come in for a comment, I think.
Just a small comment. Again, thank you so very much, Ray. Now, my knowledge of MDA is confused by the wisdom of my friend Anthony Virgin. When we talk about maritime domain awareness and situational awareness and threat awareness, and when incidents such, just you have mentioned, between the Philippines Coast Guard and their biggest neighbor, why can't that be discussed, debated within the framework of MDA? So my knowledge of MDA is thus confused through the wisdom of you people saying that these are apart from MDA. And these, very, very magnanimous seeking of apologies by my friend Anthony Virgin. So I felt like that. I personally strongly believe that MDA should include that component as well, because that also has tremendous impact on our national sovereignty, our national interests on top of it. That's my, small comment. Thank you so very much.
Thank you, sir. A well-made comment. Okay, so I think there's no further questions. So may I just wind up with one last question to you? That's about the ethical part of and credibility part of what you are doing. So you spoke about how government is, guards information, but government has credibility. When a government puts out some information, it is credible. But today there's one Ray Powell. Tomorrow, as you said yourself, there'll be 1,000 others. Who to believe, who not to believe, and how you choose to put out information and how someone else might do so raises questions about maybe motive, intent, and all about basically ethics. So any comments on that, please?
Sure. So, obviously, we're a mission-driven organization. We believe very strongly in the importance of transparent oceans in order to deter, over time, gray zone actors and illicit actors. There are certainly people in the space who put out a lot of misinformation, and then a lot of people just put out bad information, right? So that's sort of the other downside of the proliferation of tools. And frankly, early in SEALIGHT'S career, I put out my own share of bad information. And so I think, it's one of those things where the best cure for bad information is more good information, right? So I think that it is very important just to recognize, again, I come back to this over and over as my bottom line. This is going to happen whether we like it or not. So, I think the thing is, there are ways to embrace it. There are ways to sort of account for it, and then there are ways to, again, as in the example of the particular Southeast Asian country that I've been talking to, at some point you just make your peace with it and say, okay, how can we work together? Work with the ones who want to work with you. Because there are going to be illicit actors out there who are going to be putting out misinformation very aggressively. And so, I really think that there are, don't think of it as necessarily either a good thing or a bad thing. Think of it as an inevitable thing that every country needs to figure out how to deal with. Because what do you do in your waters when all of a sudden some guy shows up and starts putting out information about what's happening there? And all of a sudden your entire public is aware of the big, illegal fishing going on in your waters or something like that. So it's all coming.
Thank you very much, sir. With that, we close this session. May I request the audience to kindly give a round of applause for Mr. Ray Powell.